Hello, my name is Rana Fayez. I am here today to invite you to listen to our 5 panelists here. We're going to discuss issues on climate change sustainability in the 2016 elections. But first, we will hear a keynote address on the same topics from Mr. Bill McKibbon, right here.
Well, thank you very much. What a pleasure to be with you here today in Philly and here at PhillyCam. I'm grateful to the people here, and I'm grateful to NextGen and all the work that they've done to make climate a central issue in this year's election, the issue that it needs to be. Let's begin just by thinking for a moment about where we are, and when I mean where we are, I mean where the world sits on this Monday afternoon in October. Right now, as we speak, the biggest hurricane we've observed in many, many years in our hemisphere is crashing into Haiti. We're seeing absolutely record rainfall. Some weather stations today have been measuring rainfall of 5 inches an hour. This is the kind of rainfall we see more and more and more in a globally warmed world because warm air holds more water vapor than cold. Across the northeast United States, we've seen the number of really extreme storms, the ones that dump 2 inches of rain in 24 hours, we've seen them go up about 75% in our area. That's why every public works superintendent in the northeastern U.S. has been out replacing culverts the last 3 or 4 years because we can't handle the kind of rain we're getting. But now imagine what that's like in Haiti, in a country with horrible deforestation, in a country where they're predicting that over the next 24 hours, some towns will get 40 inches of rain. Something like that happens every place around the world each day now, whether it's extreme drought across much of Africa or in our country across California, whether it's incredible forest fire across the far north in Siberia or in our country, California, whether it's flooding that we see today in Haiti, but 2 weeks ago in Louisiana, and 2 weeks from now, who knows where. These are the signs of a planet that's seriously out of balance. We don't know what'll happen over the next few years. We don't even know what'll happen over the next few days. That hurricane, as it makes its way past Haiti and Jamaica and the Bahamas, has a wide cone of uncertainty. It could crash into the U.S. any place between Key West in Florida and Bar Harbor in Maine. And wherever it comes ashore, we'll see a great deal of damage. That's why we need very much to be talking about climate change as we have this election. There is no more important question for our future than what happens to the climate of the one planet that we've got. And we've reached the moment when that discussion can be postponed no longer. We've postponed it for a very long time. I wrote the first book about climate change for a general audience. It came out in 1989. So a long time ago, before many of the people that I've been talking to on college campuses these last weeks were born. But our political system has by and large managed to avoid taking, until very recently, any kind of significant action. The last time we had a presidential election in 2012, neither of the candidates managed even to really mention climate change until the last few days of the campaign when Hurricane Sandy made it impossible to avoid the question. In the last couple of years, though, we've begun to see some beginnings of progress towards a real discussion, towards some real action. In this country, we've watched the president put forward his Clean Power Plan, which begins to rein in the use of coal for generating electricity, and thus to start getting at some of the underlying emissions that power climate change. Importantly, he's been able to use that action that he's begun to take to help persuade people in other countries to do likewise. First, the landmark agreement with the Chinese to do some form of climate action, which opened the door 10 months ago for the Paris Agreement around climate change, the very first global agreement to do anything about the largest problem the globe has ever faced. It's not by any means a perfect agreement. It's a beginning. But the pledge that it comes with, a pledge to try and limit the planet's increase in temperature to 1.5 degrees Celsius, or at worst 2 degrees, is the most important pledge probably that the world's leaders have ever made. It will take enormous hard work to get there. At the same time, and really one of the reasons that the president has begun to move, we've seen the rise of a movement of people all across this country and all around the world determined to take on these questions. We saw people march in enormous numbers just north of here in New York City. This month, 2 years ago, 400,000 people in the streets of New York, the largest demonstration about anything in our country in a very long time. A week later, it was President Obama at the UN who said, when people march, we must listen. And that was the beginning of the momentum towards those Paris talks. Probably more importantly, people rallied in record numbers, went to jail in numbers that they hadn't for many years to try and force the president to stop the Keystone Pipeline. That fight, which when it began nobody thought was likely to succeed, turned into the biggest environmental battle in a couple of decades in this country. More people went to jail, but more people also wrote emails to the Senate than on any issue, or filed more public comments with the State Department than on any question in history. And eventually the president said, okay, we'll have to do that. In the wake of that decision, every single pipeline project, every single liquefied natural gas facility, every single frack well, every single coal mine proposed around this country is now being fought, and fought hard. As the head of the American Petroleum Institute said in a speech to his industry peers not long ago, we somehow have to stop the Keystoneization of all of our work. Well, that made my sinister heart happy to hear when he made that remark, because what that means is that citizen power is finally beginning to assert itself. You can see it most beautifully right now on the high prairie of the United States, on the Standing Rock Sioux Reservation that straddles the border between North and South Dakota along the Missouri River. There, they wanted to run another oil pipeline, a pipeline to take crude from the Bakken Shale of North Dakota down to the Midwest and ultimately to the Gulf of Mexico. And the Sioux Nation protested. They protested in part because the pipeline would cross the Missouri right above the place where they draw their drinking water from. They pointed out that the original plans had called for that pipeline to run near Bismarck until someone had said, well, what happens if it breaks? Then we'll poison the water supply for the state capital. So they moved it so that it would poison the water supply for the Sioux Reservation, one of the poorest census districts in this country. A remarkable example of the kind of environmental racism that plagues us around this country and around this world. The Sioux said no, and they've now been joined by representatives of 200 other Indian nations in the most remarkable show of unity that we've seen in Indian country for many, 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 many decades. And some of you saw the pictures 3 weeks ago now, when the pipeline construction company moved in to start building, when they started digging up sacred sites and ancestral graves of the Sioux, people moved out to try and peacefully stop them, to sit down in front of the bulldozers. And when they did, that company not only used pepper spray on them, that company used police dogs on them. The pictures that came out of North Dakota 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, look exactly like the pictures that came out of Birmingham, Alabama in 1963, except these ones are in color, those were in black and white. But they are the same images of people trying to stand for justice and being attacked by dogs. And I'm pleased to say that those images were enough to get the President of the United States to stop, at least for the moment, construction on parts of that pipeline, to demand that they get new permits and that it undergo a new review. I give you all that as background, not to say that we're doing what we should be doing now. We're not. We're not anywhere close. This country continues to produce far more carbon than the world's atmosphere can support. It continues to permit new pipelines and oil wells that it should not permit. It continues to open lands in offshore and on public lands for oil and gas drilling that no longer make sense. But the tentative steps we've begun to make, those steps are steps that would be clearly and completely reversed by the outcome of this election in November. One of the contenders has said not only that he does not believe in climate change, that he thinks it was a hoax manufactured by the Chinese, which, if you think about it, is crazy talk. Were this a hoax, it would be a hoax somehow that the Chinese, in their enormous slyness, have persuaded the world's polar ice caps to cooperate with. A hoax that somehow the Chinese had talked the chemistry of seawater into participating in. A hoax that somehow encompasses all the world's climate scientists, who somehow the Chinese have managed to suborn and intimidate into providing us with reams of fake data from every thermometer placed around the planet. It's crazy talk, but that wouldn't stop it from being real talk were he elected. On the first day in office, he has announced that he would approve the Keystone Pipeline, negating the work of tens of millions of Americans over the last 5 years to finally, for once, manage to stop big oil in its tracks. He announced, too, that he would abrogate those Paris climate accords, the one thing that the world has ever managed to do about climate change. And if he did, if the U.S. backed away, you can be sure that every other country on Earth would soon follow. The United States has historically been the largest contributor of carbon dioxide to the atmosphere. Were we to not play our part in an attempt to solve the problem, no one else could be expected to keep going with that task. They would simply follow us away, and the one fairly slim chance we've got of getting this crisis under some kind of control would vanish. But standing athwart the tides of history and yelling stop, as he has said he will do, would also, and I think this is important to realize, cost us in other ways. The place that our economy now clearly wants to go is in the direction of renewable energy. We've seen over the last decade a truly stupendous change as the engineers have done their work and done it well. The price of a solar panel has dropped about 80% since President Obama took office. Not from anything really that he's done. Much of that work happened because of earlier demand that came from the few European countries that had taken this seriously, the Germans in particular. Their demand for solar panels, and until 2 years ago, Bavaria had more solar panels than the entire United States. Okay? Their demand, coupled with Chinese manufacturing prowess, managed to drive down the cost of solar panels by 80%. 2 weeks ago, in Dubai, in the United Arab Emirates, they opened the bids for a new power station. And the winner was not as one might expect in the Middle East, some hydrocarbon. The winner was solar energy, and the price that they came in at with their bid for a big solar farm was 2.3 cents per kilowatt hour. That's an astonishing number. That's lower than we've really ever been able to generate power almost any other way. We could take advantage of that in the United States. We have the resources that we need. We're a country blessed with enormous amounts of sun and enormous amounts of wind. The Stanford professor Mark Jacobson, who's really the expert above all in this field, has tried to calculate state by state and now country by country how much solar power and how much wind power we could economically take advantage of. And he's demonstrated that we could get to 80% renewable energy by 2030 if we really went to work. And we could do it at a price that we could afford. In fact, a price that would be far, far, far less than trying to deal with the cost, just the economic cost of the out-of-control climate change we're now beginning to see. The question that's interested me in recent months, and that I've been doing a lot of writing about, is whether we have the capacity to take advantage of these possibilities, just the physical, technical capacity to do anything about it. I went and did some research about the last time that the U.S. tried to do something on this scale, which was in the year and a half or so leading into World War II. When we mobilized the industrial might of this country and bent it toward a single aim, the aim of defeating the 20th century's greatest foe, fascism. And that period's remarkable to look at. Under the very direct guidance of the federal government, American business went to work. In Michigan, for example, they built within 8 months the biggest factory in the world at Willow Run. And in that factory, they were, within a year or so, making bombers, big, complicated pieces of machinery with thousands and hundreds of thousands of parts and hundreds of thousands of rivets. They were making one an hour. That's how we were able to win the war. We could do the same thing with solar panels and with wind turbines. We possess the technological know-how, and God knows we possess the people in need of jobs, good-paying jobs, to do this kind of work. But it would take enormous focus to make it happen. And that focus will have to come through the application of political will. Political will is what elections are about. It's when we decide what we're going to do. Now, I will confess that my preferred candidate's not on the ballot in November. I'm a good Vermonter, so I spent much of last year out with my friend Bernie Sanders out on the campaign trail. And he offered that kind of focus. When they asked him in the first debate what the most important problem in the world was, he just looked at the camera and said, climate change. And even after the country's pundits had tut-tutted and tried to explain to him that the greatest problem we faced was Islamic terrorism, in the second debate they asked him the same question and he gave the same answer. He's not the candidate, obviously, but because of his perseverance, and because of the fact that he was profoundly interested in the issues above all else, that he ran a campaign of issues, he forced the discussion of these questions at the Democratic platform. In fact, I got the privilege, I guess is the right word, of serving as one of the 15 members of the committee that wrote that platform this year. Normally the platform is a fairly meaningless document. Somebody's won the election and their stump speech is transmogrified into the platform for the party. But in this case, it was the vehicle for healing the wounds between Senator Sanders and Secretary Clinton's forces in this election, and hence became an important document. And Bernie made sure that he didn't concede the race until the platform was finally written, and as a result, it's a powerfully progressive document, especially around climate change. It calls, among other things, for the prioritization of wind and sun over natural gas, which would be enough to begin to slow the the sorry fracking revolution that had its birth in many ways here in Pennsylvania. It would be enough to begin to meet the goal that Secretary Clinton has laid out of 500 million solar panels in the course of her first term. That platform also calls for some scheme to price carbon, to take into account its negative externalities, a step that every economist, left, right, and center, really has called for a quarter century, but that we've never gotten around to. And it calls, perhaps most importantly, for an emergency climate summit within the first 100 days of the new administration, a summit that, as the platform said, would be designed to help produce that World War II kind of scale of mobilization as we go forward. Now, platforms are dead documents unless one makes them real, and our job after the election, should the Democrats prevail, will be to make sure that that platform is a living document. And that'll only happen if we continue to build the kind of movements that we've built around things like Keystone, or fossil fuel divestment, or now the Dakota Access Pipeline, or all the other remarkable fights that we had. But we need, I believe, to defeat Donald Trump in order for any of that to be a possibility. Defeating him doesn't guarantee that we'll get the progress we need. Electing him guarantees that there's no possibility we'll do anything for the next 4 years, and we've run out of 4 years to waste. It doesn't strain credulity, I think, to say that because of the stakes around climate change, this is the most important election that we've faced in my lifetime. If we're not able to act, and very soon, then the scientists I know are pretty clear we won't be able to act effectively in the future. We're reaching points of no return. We've lost half the summer sea ice in the Arctic. Every time we lose more, we lose a nice white mirror that reflects 80% of incoming solar radiation back out to space. We replace it with blue water that soaks up that incoming sun's rays. When that happens, this entire process is amped up, and there are a dozen other feedback cycles like that. The point is that we've begun to run out of time. We can't afford to waste anymore. And it doesn't strain credulity, therefore, to say that the voters of Pennsylvania are going to have a very outsized impact on the geological future of the planet. This is one of the 2 or 3 places in the country that will decide this most important of elections. And if we decide it badly here, then there is very little chance that we'll be able to do the things that we need to do for the planet in the time that we have. That gives Pennsylvania voters superpowers of a kind, at least for the next 35 days. After that, your powers will vanish, and you'll be mere mortal Americans again like everybody else. But for the moment, you're extraordinarily strong. Strong enough to be able to do something about what's going on in Haiti today. Okay? People in Haiti can't do anything about this. They can't divest their endowments from fossil fuel. They don't have any money. They can't use less fossil fuel. They're not using any to speak of now. And they certainly can't affect the decisions of the most important country on earth. All they can do is somehow try to take shelter from rain that just keeps coming and coming and coming. Our job is to figure out how to start cleaning up the damage that we've been causing now for a very long time as we pour carbon into the atmosphere. And our job takes many forms. Some of it's individual action, when we change our light bulbs or decide to ride a bike instead of drive a car or take public transit or whatever it is. Those are all really important things to do. The roof of my house is covered with solar panels. But I do not try to fool myself that that's getting much done about climate change. In the end, this is a systemic, structural problem that, if it is ever going to be solved, will be solved with systemic, structural change. Will be solved with something that begins to redress the balance of power that for too long is tilted in the direction of the richest industry on Earth, and to change that balance so that it tilts in the direction of chemistry and physics. There's a lot of discussion sometimes about political reality and about how much we can get done, and it's important to take that into account. But we should never remember that in the end we are dealing with a problem not of political reality, but of reality. It's not the kind of political problem we're used to dealing with, where we meet in the middle and reach some kind of compromise, because chemistry and physics are extremely poor negotiating partners. They just look at whatever we're doing and see how much carbon it adds up to and then do their thing. So our job, and it is a difficult job demanding real maturity, is to stand up to the challenge, make the changes, and try to preserve this world in something like the form that we've known it. And I'll end simply by saying that there's not anything at all radical that I've been describing tonight. All that environmentalists, all that people like NextGen are asking for is a world that works a little bit like the world that we were born into, the world that people have known for 10,000 years. The most important thing that happened in the lifetime of everybody watching this is that we left behind the Holocene, the 10,000-year period of benign climatic stability that coincided, not coincidentally, with the rise of human civilization. We've left that behind. We've moved into some other place we don't really have a name for. And the only question is how far into it we're going to move and how much damage we're going to do. And that question is as important a question as we've ever answered. It's as important a question as our grandparents faced when they faced fascism across the ocean in Europe. It is our generation's complete challenge, the next generation's complete challenge. And this November is one of the really, really important moments in that fight. As I said before, what we do on Election Day is really important. And if it comes out right on Election Day, what we do the day after and the day after that becomes really important too, because nothing will happen automatically. We'll have to mobilize and demand it. But for the moment, for the next month, there's nothing more important than Pennsylvanians can do than make sure that this election doesn't become one that our children and grandchildren look back on with a kind of horror. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bill. So Bill McKibbon is, if you haven't figured it out yet, an environmental activist. And he is very passionate about voters coming out in Pennsylvania. He traveled all the way from Vermont today to make sure that he gives us this message. If you'd like to keep up with him, he is the co-founder, senior advisor at 350.org. You can keep up with his future appearances and find more information about his book.